I'm scanning the wine list and just sweating bullets because I feel like this is a test. And it was as part of the interview. And so I thought, oh, I'll choose something safe and fancy, Mondavi Cabernet from California. So I went with that. And then I look up and he goes, well, that's going to be interesting with my Dover Soul. Anyway, learned later that's kind of an incredibly bad match. Didn't get the job. Don't think it was because of the wine choice, but I never felt so intimidated and so like I need to know what this wine stuff is all about because I never want to feel that way again because it's something that gives us pleasure, but it's also wine is something that can make us feel very uptight and very small town.
Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 144. Why are restaurant wine lists often tricky to navigate even for wine professionals? Is it worth pursuing wine certifications and courses? Wine is the most value-added agricultural product that we produce, so why are there so many barriers for these small farmers who try to sell their wines across the country? You'll get those answers and more wine stories coming up next. We're turning the tables, and Paul Kay, host of the Wine Talks podcast, is interviewing me. In the show notes, you'll find a full transcript of our conversation, links to both of my books, how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, and where you can find me on Zoom, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube live video every Wednesday at 7 p.m. That's all in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/144. Now, on a personal note, before we dive into the show, on Sunday, my son Ryan came home from Waterloo University, where he's studying software engineering. I hadn't seen him since Christmas. Due to the lockdown, Waterloo was a hotbed for the Delta virus. He's safe, thank goodness, and double vaccinated. And he also had back-to-back academic terms. It was so good to have him home again. I've been using the hug coupons every day that he gave me for Christmas. It really reminds me of how fast life goes by, and it's worth every effort to slow it down with a hug or a glass of wine. Okay, on with the show.
Now, from high atop his desk, get ready to peel it all back and get to the root of the subject. No pun intended. With Paul Kay on Wine Talks, where he takes no prisoners and calls it the way he sees it.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul Kay, and we are in studio today in beautiful Southern California, about 65 degrees here in Los Angeles, and I hope you are experiencing the same across the country. We have a wonderful guest today, Natalie McLean. We'll get to the introductions in a second. Wine Talks is available on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, you name it, we are there. And always sponsored by the Original Wine of the Month Club, now sporting the Bordeaux and Napa series. But let's get to the show, because this is a lot of fun. I was fortunate enough to be on her show recently, and we wanted to get her on Wine Talks because this is Natalie McLean, all the way from Canada. What part of Canada are we in, Natalie?
I'm in Ottawa, the capital, the snowy capital.
Is it cold up there today?
It's getting warm. Our kind of warm, though. I should redefine what warm is after hearing your weather report. We're in Celsius, so the conversion always escapes me, but it's about plus 8 degrees Celsius right now. So we're above freezing.
16th is 16. That's like 30. That's like 46.
Exactly.
45.
So we're all wearing shorts and T-shirts as a result because We are Canadian. We are winter hardy.
See, I set out when I was a kid, as a teenager, I was going to come up with my own conversion because it's not a linear conversion from centigrade to Fahrenheit. You have to have sort of a moving scale. But I double the centigrade and I add 28. And that'll get you within a couple of degrees either way. And as it gets warmer, that scale changes a little bit. But I want to read your accolades because this is very important. Primarily, you consider yourself the chief of wine happiness. And we're going to get to that in a second.
Absolutely.
We're going to define that. But you're author of the book, Red, White, and Drunk All Over, an our kind of book, a wine-soaked journey from grape to glass, and the book, Unquenchable, a tipsy quest for the world's best bargain wines. You also have won James Beard Fisher Distinguished Writing Award, Calling the Shots, to James Beard Award for the Internet Column and Feature Writing, easy for me to say, Dining in the Wild Wild West, Lady Sings the Booze. These are clever names. Lady Sings the Booze, Red, White,
I can't
Drunk.
resist a good pun.
Red, White, and Drunk All Over. And Waiter, There's a Flaw in My Wine. So all interesting subjects. It reminds me of the joke, hey, waiter, what's that fly doing in my soup? And he says the backstroke. So
Love it.
tell us about this journey, because it also suggests in some of the internet articles about you and what you've done that your husband got you into this. Is that true?
Absolutely. Well, I say I started drinking when I met my husband and haven't found a reason to stop. He's now my ex-husband, by the way.
Okay, well, we got to give some credit.
Good. Wine helped. I actually specialize in divorce wine tastings, which Cabernet pairs best with burning wine love letters. But anyway, that's another topic and another tasting.
We're going to have to talk about that for sure. But
okay.
But go ahead.
I compare wines with, if you found yourself a good divorce lawyer and it's a great prenup, or not prenup, but the after the fact. Anyway, yes. I'm getting carried away. I'm prone to that. But I did get into wine with him. We were two MBAs, A-type personalities, and we moved to Toronto together as we met in business school. So we started first taking Spanish at night and sort of conjugating Spanish verbs and all that after a long day at work. He was at Citibank. I was at Procter & Gamble. That just was, we couldn't hack it. Then we thought, let's take up golf. And that was a really bad idea because,
wow.
Type A personalities, with long iron clubs, not a good pairing. Then I saw a wine course at our local college and I thought, we can drink at night. That will calm us down and we'll have fun. And so it started with that. We took it together. I continued for the full sommelier diploma program, but he just took the one course and enjoyed it.
You said a mouthful there. I have to ask a couple of questions because Ottawa is what part? My North American geography is not very good as far as Canada is concerned. What part of the country is it?
That's okay. We're in Ontario. We're about an hour flight from Toronto. We're actually the country's capital, but we're so snowy here. Voltaire described Canada once as a few acres of snow. So no one knows where we are. We're the great white north. So
at least you got accolades from Voltaire. So that's great. But Spanish? I mean, seriously, why would you take up Spanish? Why not French?
Because we're type A's. Oh my gosh. Yeah, well, we learned French in school. So we thought, being such obsessive compulsives, let's get another language just for fun. And learning languages is beautiful, but not after an 10-hour workday at two very intense companies. It was like, oh my gosh.
It's very hard. My listeners have heard this before, but I started about 5 years ago studying French, and I was hell-bent to learn it. And my dad speaks French because in Cairo, where he grew up, in the 30s, French was the second language of the country until the English protectorate came in, and then English became obviously the second language. But if you watch film from the 30s from Cairo, most of the business signs are in Arabic and in French. So it's hard to do. There's actually services now. There's one called italki.com, in case you want to resurrect your Spanish pursuit.
It's good to know. Good to know.
So, and then the golf thing's hilarious because it reminds me of the Raymond episode where they decide as a couple they're going to play golf together and, sort of take on the husband's hobby. And it doesn't go well in the episode.
It doesn't go well. No. I had this long club and I'm in the sandpit going, I don't need any more tips, darling.
And that would happen for sure. Yeah. So, but it did say he suggested that you take wine classes. Was there any wine enthusiasm prior to that besides just catching a buzz late at night?
Well, I cottoned onto wine because I went from Procter & Gamble to a high-tech company that's now the headquarters of Google in Mountain View. So I started arranging my meetings, quarterly meetings, on a Friday or a Thursday so I could drive up to Napa. Because the one thing when you're working in an intense job, the one thing you can do is take clients out to dinner and start to gain an appreciation for wine, that sort of thing. So there was no time for golf, thank goodness, but I started to learn about wine. That was always there in the background. And so we both thought, yeah, that sounds good. Let's find out what we're drinking so we know what to buy and how to pair it with food and that sort of thing.
Was it intimidating back then? Because Procter & Gamble, for one, being corporate America, I mean, the huge company, and I want to get into that marketing, the guerrilla marketing that they do a little bit if we can. But was it intimidating for you to start? You're trying to entertain clients. You're going to dinner. You look at the wine list. That's very confusing. Each wine list is different. How did that go for you?
Well, the first experience I actually remember was pre-Procter & Gamble when I was at the end of, or near the end of the MBA. We were all getting interviews. And I went for one with McKinsey & Company, which is a consulting company. And the final rounds, you went to dinner with a partner. And he was shaking down his Rolex watch and his little Burberry cufflinks and all the rest of it. And he goes, why don't you choose the wine? And so I had nothing, no experience, except maybe, cold baby duck back of the high school portable. That was it. Like that was
we used to sell that, by the way, just so you know.
No dissing it. That was just, that was my experience. Yeah. So I thought, well, and I'm scanning the wine list and just sweating bullets because I feel like this is a test. And it was as part of the interview. And so I thought, I'll choose something safe and fancy. Mondavi Cabernet from California. So I went with that. And then I sort of look up and he goes, well, that's going to be interesting with my Dover Soul. Anyway, learned later that's kind of an incredibly bad match. Didn't get the job. Don't think it was because of the wine choice, but I never felt so intimidated and so like I need to know what this wine stuff is all about because I never want to feel that way again because it's something that gives us pleasure, but it's also wine is something that can make us feel very uptight and very small town girl in my case.
It's an interesting story because here you are, the pressure of an interview, so to speak, and sort of a social. A friend of mine's son just was interviewed for a job, and the last interview was they took him to a bar. And this is a high-end real estate firm that does a lot of big business across America, and they wanted to know how he socialized, in that environment. And in that environment, you normally would say, well, I'm not going to order a drink because that might be a bad thing. But they wanted him to order a drink and understand how he reacts to that in that situation, which I thought was interesting.
Absolutely.
It seems to me, and this is for the listeners and for people that are trying to study wine, I want to learn about wine, that isn't intimidating. It's even intimidating for us if I'm on a list that I don't know. In other words, it's always handed to me, right? You probably get the list everywhere you go. Whether you're with guests or friends or family, they go, give the list to Natalie. She understands wine. And then you look at it and you go, gee, I don't think I've had that Burgundy. I don't think I've had that Bordeaux. And then we go back to the stuff that we've may recognize or we've tasted before. And I highlight I was responsible for the wine at an Easter gathering years ago with my in-laws down Palm Springs, and I forgot to bring it. Okay, so that's the first mistake. So,
oops.
Then I went to the market. And just like every other consumer, I went to the market, started looking at the wines, and I'm going, I never tasted that. So I really don't know if it's proper or balanced or whatever adjectives you're looking for. And I made a bad decision. One of them was really good value. The other one wasn't so great. And I bought it on the brand. So it takes confidence to do this, doesn't it?
It does. And you're right, Paul. Like restaurant wine lists, if they're any good, are trying to get wines that you haven't tried before or that aren't often stocked in liquor stores or that sort of thing, because they want to give you a new taste experience. So that puts us, even as experienced tasters, often in the same seat because I don't know. And, am I going to take a chance on that, whatever, $75, $50 Burgundy or whatever it would be, a lot more expensive on a restaurant list.
I wish.
Yeah, exactly. And so I always defer to the sommelier if I'm in a place that cares about wine. Like, what do you think of this wine? Or, we're having the veal and the chicken. Do you think this wine will work? And the thing that people come back at me for is, well, how can I signal how much I want to pay?
Right.
Especially if you don't want to declare out loud how much you're willing to pay for love on a date or business. And I just tip the wine list toward me. and just point at the prices.
Oh,
Only
clever.
the sommelier is server. Yeah. And I'll say, I want something in this range. And everyone else thinks I'm talking style or region.
Yeah, right.
But I'm signaling this is how much I want to pay.
Now, that's the other intimidating thing, though, is that if you're with guests that you're not sure what their budgeting is like or whether they're used to spending $100 on a bottle of wine or not, you're sort of intimidated. So when we were in Paul Bocuse in Lyon, I was able to say the 400 dollars type thing to the somm because my guests didn't know what that meant. And I was telling him I wanted a Bordeaux in the $400 range. And, that was easy. But you're right. You're worried like somebody in front of you that your guests are going to go, $100, in the back of their mind. And you're going, oh, I guess I'm buying, right? But that's an interesting comment, though. The somm's role at a restaurant, a real restaurant that has a real wine list, not one that's produced by the local wholesaler, is pretty important to help guide clients through and interpret what you're asking them for. You pointed to the dollar amount, but stylistically, they have to interpret what we tell them. Well, we like, the way I do that, maybe it's the same as I ask people what they usually drink. Well, I drink, Jordan, or I usually drink Silver Oak or whatever. And then we can at least get a style through that. But how do you recommend to people at a restaurant that are trying to decipher a wine list and explain to the somm what they're doing?
Exactly. That's a great tip. Really great tip.
So what is the chief of wine happiness? I mean, that's a self-proclaimed thing, or is that a degree that you earn?
I would love to go to that school. Oh my goodness. I just have to figure out my minor and my major. But chief of wine happiness, I recognize that wine is pleasure. For most of us, we are just buying a glass of pleasure. We are not signing up for the encyclopedia of wine, though that's great if you want to dive headfirst into wine with all of the different facets and knowledge. But, at bottom, I think most of us just want to relax with friends, have a good glass that's not going to disappoint them. And that's my mission. So I put that rather than any initials or degrees or diplomas or anything beside my name.
That's an important distinction. I want the listeners to understand. I mean, I have full respect for MWs and MSs and anybody that's pursuing that. And in California, just to sell wine now as an entry-level job, if you just want to get in the streets and go to liquor stores and restaurants and sell them wine, you need something that says you're attempting to learn a little bit. And so those certifications are important, particularly in jobs where it's important to have knowledge, but they certainly are not degrees to the extent that we can't learn the same thing by studying ourselves. Okay, I want to make that really clear. I think maybe the confidence issue comes into play when you have that degree. In other words, I have really good friends that really understand wine, but they still describe it with a question mark at the end. I taste blackberries, do I taste, right? And it's like, no, I taste blackberries. That's what I taste.
That's right. Make an exclamation mark. Say wet violets in spring and everybody will agree with you.
Right. That's right. I got to start using that.
Yeah. Well, just as long as you say it with power.
Right.
But that's exactly why I teach online wine food pairing classes. It's people don't necessarily want to become masters of wine, most of us, but we want to become the expert on our own palate. And that is that confidence to go into a liquor store and not default to the same bottle every time, or to join a wine club, of course, and to experiment and to have the confidence. I know what I like. I know when I want to branch out and try something new. I know what pairs with a variety of dishes. That's why people come to me, at least for the online pairing courses that I offer, because, it's a very small percentage of the population that want to become true experts in the way that master of wine and master sommelier can do for you.
Well, it's a pursuit of education like anything else. If you want to learn a language, you pursue it through all the means you can. And there's plenty of resources online to read about wine and books. I've got a huge library of books accumulated over the years. So you said something important, though, the ethereal value of a glass of wine. I want people, as you put it, to just enjoy the glass of wine they're having. And you and I can't predict everybody's palate and what they're going to like, though we find something really interesting. Like the other day, I tasted a Canary Islands Lisbon Negro. I'm like, never heard of the grape, and I really enjoyed the wine. It may not that everybody enjoys it, but your idea that we want to relax with a good glass of wine. And what does that mean, good glass of wine? Well, I think it's perfectly fine, and I do it all the time, and I know it's hard to imagine. I dump out a lot of wine. Now, maybe because I have access to it, but I don't want to suffer through a glass of wine. Why would I want to do that?
Life's too short.
Yeah.
Yep, life's too short. And we're trying to drink within moderation limits. So you can only consume so much alcohol.
That's
and
true,
that's
too.
drinking, not tasting. So you got to choose wisely, I think.
I'm
just
testing.
like everything else in life. Yes.
Well, you want to test the limits of, you can only drink so much alcohol. Probably tested the limits too many times on that. But I was tasting the other day, and I'm not sure if we talked about this on your show, but I was tasting the other day, and I tasted a Shiner, a wine with no label. And we're going through a wedding right now. My daughter's getting married in a couple of weeks. Actually,
Congratulations.
Wait a minute. Thank you. It's less than that now. It's scary. And I think to myself, well, I suppose if this wine had a private label on it and it was part of a venue that did a lot of weddings, this would be okay. And I stopped myself. This is my own thought. Wasn't talking to anybody. I was talking to myself. I'm like, no, actually, if I'm going to have a wedding and invite guests, I want to pour nice wines. I want people to feel what you're talking about. Relax, maybe even have a conversation about the wine at the table with the other guests. Why would I sacrifice one of the most important parts of the meal? Let me cut back on the valet budget. Let me cut back and have a band that's not so good.
Yeah,
So,
it's like buying a fancy car without having the money to pay for gas. I mean,
good point.
make room for it.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about your book, Red, White, and Drunk All Over. So when you after you set out to learn about wine with your husband, by the way, just for fun, how long did the ensemble lessons last?
He only took the one course.
Oh.
Our marriage lasted longer. That was a good 20 years. But yeah, he was done because then he deferred to me. You know how you do often in a relationship. Okay, you do wine, I'll do finances or whatever.
Right.
That's stereotypical. But anyway, yeah, he did the one intro course with me and then I took over.
Did you learn like his palate? Because my wife's palate is totally different than mine. And I ensure that I bring home things that she will appreciate. And I sometimes open 2 bottles because I don't feel like it.
Exactly. He had a different palate, and so does my current partner, Miles. And at first, Miles was drinking very inexpensive Australian Shiraz. And I thought, oh,
Wow.
great. And then so I'd start opening wines. And one night he noticed that my red wine was a different color. He said, what's that? And I just said, red wine. You have red wine. I have red wine. And
As basic as it gets.
Exactly. And then he said, no, that looks different. And so I had to explain to him that it was a Rhone Valley from Gigal and it was pricier. So he said, I want to taste. This sounds awful of me, but he took a taste and he loved it. And then from there, he's been so much more expensive to keep in wine. He got rid of the inexpensive Shiraz and then just switched to that. But our tastes still differ. I mean, generally, I actually enjoy Pinot, but he's still on that pricey Gigal Rhone Valley.
You got to keep him from going north. Don't get him into the Côte de Nuit or else you're going to be in big problems.
Yeah, exactly. There is no north.
No,
France ends there
right.
for wine at the Rhone Valley. That's it.
This is a conversation I had yesterday with a woman who's trying to look into the idea of starting a club for a very well-known consumer magazine. She lives in New York. And I said, there's fine wine shops in New York on almost every corner, it seems like. And you can find really, really nice wines there. In Canada, is it the same? I mean, how do you buy wine in Canada? What's the availability of different things like Guigel, your Rhone wines, or Côte de Nuit Burgundies? What's the general availability given the liquor laws in Canada?
Well, we're still more suffering from prohibition hangover than you are in the States, in that most of the provinces have government-controlled liquor stores. So in Ontario, we have the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, LCBO. And
the famed.
Exactly. And there are a few wine shops that are grandfathered into existence because wineries opened wine shops, and so they're allowed to exist. But we do not have a privatized system here. They do in Alberta and in spots across the country, but it's very regulated. And so the availability depends on the buying power of those near monopolies. So the LCBO does have a lot of buying power, does present a lot of wines through its stores, but we just don't have a store that's, like Tuscany is us kind of thing. If you just want to specialize in Tuscany, you really do have to go with the availability of what's in those liquor stores.
Actually, yesterday I was looking for pricing on the Bordeaux I really liked. And I just found in Southern California a Bordeaux shop. I'm like, wow, that can't be like doing that great. But actually, during COVID, actually, it's been very good. But when you said the LCBO, which, I think it's like one of the largest retailers in the world, right? I mean, they buy everything. And Pennsylvania, up until recently in the U.S., was the largest U.S. retailer because they had the same sort of restrictions, but just in a state level instead of a country level. But I just realized, okay, so Canada suffering from a little bit of post-prohibition, and then headed south to the U.S., we suffer from it. But Joe Kennedy was smart enough to give all his friends regional control over the booze distribution. So at least we have some freedom, and each state has control over it, and some are more free than others. But then you go to Europe, and I'm wondering if there's a relationship between the amount of time wine has been part of the culture and the freedom to buy it and express it. So in Europe, there's no problem, right? Most of the rest of the world, there's no problem. Then you go to the U.S., we suffered through prohibition. It was political football, still is. We're a little freer than Canada. And now Canada, probably the tail end of alcohol being part of the culture, has the most restrictions. And why has this become a political thing? Why can't we just experience life as the Europeans do? Is there any wind of change coming or no?
Oh, yeah. I think change is coming, but wine has always been politicized, whether it's tariff disputes or just the sin taxes put on alcohol like it is on gasoline and other goods that the government feels we don't really need to consume. But I do think change is coming and, consumers demand it. But now in a COVID, hopefully we're coming out of COVID, but in this environment, liquor laws are starting to loosen. For example, restaurants could never deliver alcohol with meals. Now they can. Those laws have been changed. And the word is they're going to stay now opening up their own wine delivery business. Because, it can include a saltine cracker and that's the food. And then just sell your stock of wine. And as we know, Paul, in the restaurant business, customers will eat you poor and drink you rich. The margin is in all of the alcohol, but even the tea and the coffee. So I think change is coming. It took a disruptor, an inflection point like COVID that I think is an accelerant that brought the future forward 10 years. But that's a good thing because we're starting to get more options and I think it will continue.
You're right. I agree with that. And in America, it changes fluidly. In 1988, when I bought the company for my father, nobody really cared. I mean, you just shipped because it wasn't a thing then. My dad invented the idea in the 70s. So even in the early 80s and late 80s, you just did it. If you loaded the UPS truck with 200 boxes and you only manifested 150, nobody really cared. And they could have gone anywhere. We had what we called reciprocity states in California. So if Minnesota or Missouri wrote a law that resembled our law, which said basically, hey, we can ship wine to your state and you can ship wine to our state and we don't care. We're not going to tariff or tax anybody. Those are still around, but they're different than they were. A lot of them went different ways. And so we're still seeing in the U.S. challenges to liquor laws in some states strapping down more and other states loosening it up. The problem with America is we're getting sued now for shipping stuff. There was an article came out the other day where it was determined that 1 in 3 bottles shipped to Michigan last year were illegal, whatever that means. And I would suggest it's probably more than that. Not illegal, but I mean, that's probably 2 in 3 bottles are illegal. But it's up to us for a lifestyle to decide, in my opinion, if we want to have wine in our meal and we want to be able to buy it openly. I think the consumer has to step up. We have a group here called Free the Grapes and be able to have access to whatever we want. What's interesting about the human race is that we're very creative. So when the governor of California shows up at the French Laundry for $800 a seat, which we were there 2 weeks before he went, and I'm sure you're aware of the story, and my wife is like, I want to go in the room because the French Laundry has 4 or 5 rooms, and normally during regular hours, there's 4 or 5 tables in each room. But what they decided to do during COVID was that you could rent one room privately at that time, and then this per seat cost prefix came $800. Okay.
Wow.
And if you're outside in the regular dining area during the patio, it was $400. Okay. So it's expensive.
What a deal.
But Newsom was in the $800 section, just so you know, just for the set the record straight. But after that, Newsom decided that he was going to tell us what was acceptable food. And you said he could deliver a saltine. The Canadian wine delivery can have a saltine and call it food, right? So we were serving 25-cent top ramen at some of the bars to get around that code, right?
Right.
It works. Then they came out, this is a true story. They came out with a list of foods that qualify for brasserie style food. So it was okay to serve a chicken breast on a plate, but not chicken wings. Okay. I mean, seriously.
People have too much time on their hands who are making these.
Can you imagine this? It was written that way. It was literally written in an article in the code that chicken breast qualifies for real food at a brasserie, but chicken wing does not. It just boggles your mind. And then you have to, who's going to enforce this? I mean, who's going to go around and be the chicken wing?
Exactly.
The chicken
was
wing
that a
police?
wing or a breast? I'm sorry. It's all cut up now. I can't tell you. But Paul, we have that same thing going on in Canada. Our laws in terms of cross-border shipping are nuts. And again, it's largely due, I believe, to the liquor stores who don't want to lose their revenue or who want to keep taking the tax revenue and turning it, well, they do turn it over to the government, but still it's a way of maintaining control. But we have free my grapes as well. But what surprises me is that wine is the most value-added agricultural product we produce in this country, and probably yours as well. It's the only product we put in the original packaging on the dinner table. We don't, I think we talked about this. We don't have the stickers on the apples or the strawberries. And yet we're not allowing these small farmers, which is what wineries are, to increase their market and allowing consumers to increase their diversity of taste from something that is truly homegrown. I mean, it boggles my mind that we are not supporting farmers in this way.
This is interesting. Wine is farming. That's really what it started as.
Fancied up farming.
Yeah, that's what it started as. I don't think the consumers know that most wine farms are just that. They're not wineries, actually. They sell their grapes to a variety of wineries. I can't tell you how much wine I taste here that started as, we used to farm grapes. We sell them to Silver Oak. We sell them to Cambridge or something. And now we make our own wines. And that's probably not a good idea, but it happens all the time.
Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Paul Kay. In the show notes, you'll find a full transcript of our conversation, how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, links to both of my books, and where you can find me on Zoom, Insta, Facebook, and YouTube live video every Wednesday at 7 p.m. That's all in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/144. You won't want to miss next week for part 2 of my chat with Paul Kay. In the meantime, if you missed episode 21, go back and take a listen. I chat about whether wine is the source of civilization with author John Mahoney. He thinks so. So do I, and here's why. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
Who was the first person that made wine? I was taught that civilization had established itself from, say, Babylon or Egypt. We go back to the time of Christ, that's 2,000 years, everything else is BC. And everybody thought that wine was 3,000. Then they said, well, no, it's probably 4,000, even 5,000 years old. But 2 places established that was incorrect, the University of Toronto and the University of Pennsylvania. Both of them did research and found out that it's well over 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years old. They've proven and actually have done scientific testing to prove that wine production is probably 7,500 to 8,000 years old.
Wow.
My research took it further, and I'm saying that we started with wine right after the last ice age.
If you like this episode, please tell one friend about it this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in the tips that I shared. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a wine that's homegrown where you live. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So subscribe for free now at nataliemclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.